Thank you. My pleasure to be here today to talk about water. I'm a water geek, kind of a water generalist geek. My technical background is hydrogeology, so I'm a groundwater scientist. My knowledge there is deep, but I worked for the state of Texas, the Water Development Board, for about 20 years, and became kind of the chief science nerd of the agency over everything on surface water, groundwater, water conservation, innovative water technologies, which included desalination, rainwater harvesting, and water reuse, among other things. So the presentation I have today is kind of a big, broad overview of the water reuse world. It's focused on Texas, which is where most of my knowledge and experience is, and it's informed, by my current life as an academic, past life, working with the state and kind of helping communities consider innovative technologies or non-traditional technologies for water supplies. And then I also serve on a number of committees, including Austin Water Forward, which is Austin developing its own 100-year water plan considering climate change, which is generally not considered. In fact, it's not considered in state water planning. And so that's interesting, looking at 100 years and thinking about where that water might come from. And then I'm going to kind of talk about maybe some things that aren't as well known about water reuse. I'm a big advocate for water reuse, so don't take any of my comments as negative. It's just like anything. You got to know the pros and the cons. Too many people think water reuse is like the solution. It certainly helps, but also has some issues to consider. So outline, just talk about a little bit about water reuse at the state level, bring it down to more of a local level, a development scale level, so like kind of like this structure, and then a household level as well. So let's talk about the state. We're getting a good reminder these days in Texas about the importance of water with three La Ninas in a row. We're continuing to suffer from a 3-year drought. I'm getting calls from folks I don't normally get calls from about concerns about running out of water. There's been a moratorium on drilling wells in Hayes County. Dripping Springs is on stage 4. There's some communities where their wells have gone dry. So it's a good time to be talking about water. Don't let a good disaster go to waste. As soon as it rains, everybody will forget about water until the next drought, and then we'll get back to it. So there's an opportunity in this current drought. This is a little old. It's from a couple weeks ago, but I like it because it kind of looks like a Tyrannosaurus Rex in that deep, exceptional drought image there. So the statewide picture comes from the water plan that Texas has. So in Texas, we're fortunate we've had statewide water planning since the early 60s. And it's a great statewide look at what's going on. Are all y'all from Texas? Some of y'all from out of town? Anybody from out of town? Yeah, so we got a lot of folks out of town. We're growing really fast. And there's a lot of growth, in particular on what's called the I-35 growth corridor between Austin and San Antonio. Hayes County has been in like the fastest growing counties in the country. Different cities along I-35, like Kyle, Buda, have also been showing up in top 10 fastest growing cities. So we're seeing a lot of pressure here locally as well. And we're expecting to see more. This is the expected population growth of Texas. Not quite a doubling, like an 80% increase, but for government work, that's close enough to saying a doubling. So all these folks are going to want a glass of water. This is also from the plan, and it's showing current and projected water supplies. And this is based on current infrastructure. So this is the water we have now in Texas. With current infrastructure, current water wells, current reservoirs with pipelines and treatment plants, current water reuse treatment plants. And so generally you would hope that this would be flat going across, and you see that with surface water infrastructure. We do see the groundwater supplies going down. 80% of our groundwater in Texas is used for agricultural purposes, and about 80% of that is pumped from the Ogallala Aquifer, and we're draining the Ogallala out. So that decrease is due to the economics of producing groundwater for irrigated agriculture drying up in the Ogallala, which is why that goes down. And then reuse, current infrastructure, should be able to fix that, keep that going over the next 50 years. So these are what I would call, at least the groundwater surface water is what I would call conventional water supplies. But like here, like Dripping Springs, I spoke to a group in Dripping Springs, and they're having some serious water problems. So they're not going to build a reservoir out there. The land's too expensive. There's neighborhoods. Topography isn't exactly amenable. And then the groundwater, the Trinity Aquifer out there is not particularly great for meeting large municipal needs. So the conventional water supplies have been used up. So we're going to have to think outside the box. We need to think innovatively when we talk about water in Texas. There's many different innovative approaches. I just want to focus on water reuse, using the water that we've already used from wastewater treatment plants. There's been a general increase of water reuse in Texas. This is showing it going from about 50,000 acre feet per year in 2000 up till the latest numbers 2020, almost 500,000. Not sure, this data gets a little hetchy, you'll see. I'm not sure why there's that rise and that dip. I don't think that's real, to be honest with you. I think the numbers were probably a little high during that period, but we're seeing it go up. And if you look at that trend, I think we're going to see more and more of it. Again, when you can't get more surface water, you can't get more groundwater. Your wastewater treatment plant is like a local spring, right? It's a source of water. Traditionally, that water is discharged, usually to surface water to send away. Why not use that water to meet future needs? In the water plan, when we see that we have higher demand for water than our current supplies are, then planning groups identify strategies to create more water. And so this is showing both existing supplies for reuse as well as strategies or plans for additional reuse. This is showing from the 5 recent water plans, all for the year 2050. And I kind of wanted to show, see if there was like maybe a growth in 2050. And again, that 2007 looks a little weird. I think that's wonky and should be lower. And then comparing 2017 to the recent plan that came out in 2022, which is in that red box, more on the flat side. My student Ricardo and I were at a rainwater harvesting conference in San Antonio this morning, and someone from the Water Development Board mentioned to me that there's a lot of changes afoot with this drought, where people are rethinking their future water supplies, and she was anticipating there'll probably be a lot more water reuse in the future. These are where the water supplies are expected to come from in the future for the state. So to meeting all those additional needs from all that additional growth, and in part also that decline in groundwater. But there is no solution for that, ultimately no solution for that decline in groundwater due to agriculture. Ag needs dirt cheap water. And Mississippi River, anybody? So that was in the 68 water plan. Bring the Mississippi River out to the Ogallala, out to the high plains. I've highlighted here the reuse. But if you look at the big pie first, there's surface water, 37%. There are plans to build new reservoirs. Locally, Lower Colorado River Authority has plans to build an off-channel reservoir, probably in Bastrop County. It's like a ring dike, so it'll take flood flows or releases from Highland Lakes, pump them out of the river and put them in there. But that surface water number also includes contract renewals for water. So the plan doesn't allow you to assume a contract's going to renew when it comes due over the next 50 years. Demand reduction, so water conservation, drought restrictions. Groundwater is 14.5%. There's a little bit of seawater desal in there, 2.5%, and then reuse, 15.1. So it's a considerable amount of water in the future portfolio, and I believe that's just going to continue to grow as a proportion of future supplies. You see indirect reuse, so that's you can take your wastewater as an environmental buffer. So maybe you put it into the lake on one side, and you pipe it out the other side. Maybe you run it down the river, and then you pull it out of the river. So there's some environmental buffering going on there. Other direct reuse is non-potable reuse, and direct means pipe to pipe. There's no environmental buffer. And then there's, interestingly enough, direct potable reuse. So that's pipe to pipe. that water is being treated to then be used for potable purposes. So let's move down to a more local perspective, really going more granular on the state water plan. Here's this local water supply. Back when I was at the state, I had a staff member make this map. This is permitted dischargers. Interestingly enough, tried to figure out like how much water is discharged. That's really hard to figure out. It turns out there's not a digital database that you can just go to and pull that number out. But I'm not sure why they chose yellow for wastewater, but they did. But you can see, where there's urban centers, there's a potential for using this water. So this is showing that indirect reuse and where it's anticipated across the state. So these are water user groups or folks that need water, and it has a geographic component to it. So a lot of the indirect reuse is up in Dallas-Fort Worth, and it's quite frankly a perfect place for it. There's a lot of reservoirs up there that are in the middle of sprinkled through the urban area. There's been some water managers that have used their reservoir, their wastewater treatment plant, their reservoir to double the water capacity of their reservoir, so firm yield, which is a remarkable thing. So that's a big focus. You see a little bit on the lower Colorado River, that kind of linear train there, and also some in Houston and some out in San Angelo, kind of in the western part of the state. When we talk about direct reuse, more of that is here in Central Texas, large part because we don't have a bunch of reservoirs to treat the wastewater, store it in a reservoir, or do an engineered wetland and store it in a reservoir. So you see more of the direct to pipe, like the purple pipe and the purple sprinkler heads. That's some sort of reuse water. But you still see it up in Dallas, and you see it down in Houston, sprinkled a bit more across the state. El Paso wants to do that direct reuse because, I mean, you store it up there, it's gone the next day, right? It evaporates completely. And then this is interesting. This is direct potable reuse, which is, kind of like the holy grail, where you're taking wastewater and completely cleaning it up to use for drinking water for potable purposes. The first place in the world that did that is in Windhoek, Namibia, 1968. And the second place to do that was Big Spring, Texas, 10, 15 years ago. Third place was Wichita Falls. They did it as an emergency drought supply. It is now an indirect reuse plant. And then El Paso is building a good-sized direct reuse plant. And this is showing where strategies are, communities are to do more of this. A lot of it down in the lower Rio Grande Valley. Lots of small communities. The Rio Grande is pretty fickle, both due to drought, but also international politics on water management. There's also quite a bit, surprisingly, in Central Texas. Dripping Springs, I think Kyle is also looking at it. And again, it's just the conventional supplies, local conventional supplies are gone or used up. And so where are you going to go get that water for the future? So this is coming. I've tried the water at Big Spring, Texas. It was a Texas Water Development Board funded project. Made sure I was on the right side of the plant before I sampled the water. Came out clear. I drank it and I was like, yeah, this is pretty good water. Slight hint of beef enchiladas, but other than that, that's a joke. Water's perfectly fine. It goes through reverse osmosis, cleaner than rainwater, and a good supply of water. So I think we're going to see more of that in the future. We put out a report at the Meadows Center. I worked with Vanessa Puig Williams, who was a single shingle kind of water attorney at the time, to look at regulatory impediments to implementing One Water. And actually, Texas is a good place to use innovative technologies. The Texas Commission on Equality is very open to looking at innovative things, which is, I think, why Texas was the first place in the United States to employ it. I remember going to meetings in California about direct potable reuse. There was a big discussion about, we got to make sure all the ducks are lined up and all this stuff before anybody tries this. I'm like, we're doing it. I'm like, no, you're not. And I said, yeah, we are. We're doing direct potable reuse. It's like, nobody believed me. And then later on, they're like, yeah, you're right. You are doing direct potable reuse. It's like, I'm a Texan. We don't lie. It ain't bragging if it's true. Um, so, so, so we identified that there was like maybe one deficiency was that, there are no regulations for direct potable reuse. There are no federal regs and there are no state regs. There are regulations on what that final water should look like. And given that there's so many communities, particularly small ones, that are looking at direct potable reuse, we had a recommendation that TCQ should maybe put together a guidance document, because like if you're going to do direct potable reuse, you need to be doing monitoring of your wastewater stream like 2 years in advance. So if you wake up one day and you're like, holy crap, we need, so to speak, holy crap, we need, we need an emergency supply of water, and the state says you need 2 years of data before we're going to let you do it, it's too late at that point. So they've developed that document. There was a bill that passed 2 sessions ago to make that happen. On the abuse side, purple pipe is like the color of reuse. So I found a purple whip on Walmart. So that you can pick it up for $8.52. Only got a 3-star review though, but there's downstream impacts. Some cases, as Jenna knows, we'll probably hear from Jenna later. You don't want treated wastewater going into hill country streams, pristine, clear streams. River gets mucked up a bit, nobody can tell. You can probably put it in there. But if you're no longer putting treated wastewater back into the river, that means there could be environmental consequences downstream, and also reduces the resilience of water users downstream in their permits. Folks see reuse a lot of times as a really reliable source of water, but it's really a water supply enhancer. The resilience of reuse is the source supply of that water. Well, I'll hear people say, well, we're going to hook up to that reuse water from City of San Antonio because people are always going to be flushing toilets. We can guarantee that. And so we'll have a 100% reliable source of water. Well, if the aquifer goes dry, there's no water to flush the toilet. So you got to be careful about, what the sustainability of the supply is. It's tied back to the source. I also hear a lot of people, including people with PhDs, say direct potable reuse, it's an infinite water machine. It's just going out the back and coming in the front, going out the back, coming in the front. It doesn't work that way. There's water losses when you're just delivering water, when you're treating water, both when you're delivering it, both when the wastewater comes back, that are quite substantial, maybe 30–40%. And so you're losing a bit of the water as you go through that process. So it's nowhere close to being an infinite source of supply. And so again, it's only as resilient as the source water. And then, all those folks that I showed on that map really going to do direct potable reuse. There's a requirement in law that if you're a community, you have to show a plan that you're going to have water for the next 50 years. And, 50 years is a long ways out. And so, the consultant may be like, you need to figure out where your water is coming from. One option is maybe seawater desal with a pipeline. Are you going to do that as a 3,000 member community? Probably not. But we could slip in direct potable reuse, and we got 30 years to figure out if we need to do it. So I kind of wonder too, are some of these communities really serious about it, or is it just a placeholder for something else? And then finally, the poop. You can't handle the poop. I wonder about small communities running direct potable reuse systems. My wife and I are fortunate enough to have a cabin in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. They've been trying for the last 20 years to develop a direct potable reuse plant, and it has been a comedy of errors up there. They haven't turned it on yet, but just one horrible mistake after another that's prevented them from operating the plant. And I'm just like, I'm not sure I would trust that water from a community of 800 people, because this is pretty sophisticated stuff, and you don't want to mess up because you could kill people with this water. So I kind of wonder, it's like, are these small communities really able to do this? And this might be an opportunity for folks that are in sensor technology and information, kind of remote tracking things, to make these systems foolproof. I'm not saying they can't do it, but something to think about. Like Austin, El Paso, I'd trust them. San Antonio, I would trust them with a direct potable reuse plant. These small communities, I'm not so sure. Let's talk about development scale. Might hear some more about this, but Meadows Center has been involved in the Wimberley One Water School. So, the the school system in Wimberley was school district Wimberley was looking to do a conventional project, hook up to a water supply, run the wastewater out through conventional wastewater treatment. And the Meadows Center, along with some other local folks, approached the school district board and said, we think there's a better way. And so they collect rainwater off the roof, air conditioning condensate. There's an on-site wastewater treatment and reuse system. There's big rainwater tanks out there. They use it for fire suppression. They do bring in the city water, if you will, for potable purposes, but all the non-potable purposes are reuse, rainwater, AC condensate, and expected to reduce the use of the Trinity Aquifer, which feeds the springs and the streams, by 90%. And even better, is expected to save $800,000 over 30 years in utilities. So this is that one water concept. You're using the built environment as your source of water, and that reduces environmental impacts, and even better if you save money along the way. Austin has done something pretty cool as part of its 100-year water plan. Is they've built an on-site black water treatment plant on their new development structure. It's called CLARA, Closed Loop Advanced Reuse Assembly. It's associated with rainwater and condensate harvesting system too that they use for makeup water for the system. It's two kind of like almost little trailer type things. This is the control one with the nice roof. There's hydroponics and the wastewater treatment thing. I was fortunate enough to be at the grand opening. I've never cried at a wastewater treatment opening before, but it was like, it's such a cool project. It's well done. It looks gorgeous. You would never guess what it is. There's no odors. They take the black water from the office building, comes through this treatment train. It goes back in the flush toilets and urinals. And that, combined with rainwater and condensate harvesting, they're reducing the use of the Colorado River in Texas. Those of you from out of state, we have the first Colorado River. It's different than the other one, the original Colorado River. They're reducing their footprint by 95%. So pretty amazing project there. And there's more folks that want to do that. That's not cheap. I thought, this is probably vanity water on Austin's part, but there's two other entities, one private, another public, that wants to do this because it will save them money. Austin's also, as part of its plan, is looking to do sewer mining. So remember I told you that wastewater treatment plant's like a local spring. Your sewer main is like a local river. So it has water going through it, among other things. And there's an opportunity there to intercept, divert some of that flow, do a black water treatment plant to then provide water supply. And then you can put the residuals back into the sewer line. So also kind of an innovative thing that's happening there. This report also identified one impediment, which was like the EPA's rules and regulations, and then it also follows that Texas didn't anticipate people doing stuff like this. And so we working with TCQ in the legislature, a bill passed that will allow private entities or maybe the non-utility entities to do on-site black water treatment and be able to use the city system as a backup. Abuse, it's new technology, so people are nervous about it. When the city of Austin invited in, you need a plumber to come in and certify a building as safe, it's plumbing. And when the private company came in to look at that Blackwater building, that Blackwater project I showed you, plumber's like, what the hell is going on here? I'm not signing off on this. So that became an issue, finding somebody who is willing to sign off on bringing on-site treated Blackwater back into a building. There's a permitting issue, but that will hopefully get fixed over the next year, and it can be expensive. So finally, let's talk about household. I don't know if you read this book, 50 Shades of Greywater. Anybody read Kinky Conservation? I'm not so greywater harvesting is like at a household, you divert water from your showers, your sinks, and your laundry, and then use that outdoors, generally for irrigation. I'm not a big fan of it because if you have centralized wastewater, that water's not being wasted if it goes down the drain. If your water goes down the drain, it's going to the central treatment facility. They're either treating it and reusing it, or they're treating it and putting it in the river. As long as we don't do that in the hill country, if you put it in the river, there's benefits. If you divert it at your house and run it outside, it's a consumptive use because you're basically evaporating it. There's other issues with it. There's the assumption that that water often doesn't have pathogens in it, but if depending on how good a time you had on 6th Street, you might have fecal coliform all over you on your clothes when you wash your clothes. It's also, the detergents tend to increase salinity, so there can be salt buildup issues. So there's just some issues there. I think, in a rural setting, if you're diverting that flow and not say mixing it with the black water, I think there's benefits there, but I think that's something to consider. And then Ricardo and I just came from that rainwater harvesting conference this morning and saw a presenter talk about household scale black water potable reuse, which my first knee-jerk reactions, that's crazy talk. But who knows, that probably is the next frontier in water reuse. So let me conclude. Hopefully I've been able to kind of share some thoughts about reuse. There's a huge potential for it. I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger. I forgot to mention the billions of dollars on those slides. So hopefully, those of you that invest in equipment saw those big B's on those numbers. There's certainly going to be a lot more of that happening. And I think in future plans, again, we're just going to see more and more of it. And it's popping up in surprising places. First, I never thought I would see direct potable reuse in the United States in my career. And I certainly never thought I would see it in Central Texas. And, every year, more and more folks are talking about it. So that's certainly coming. I think, as our growth pressures, particularly the I-35 growth corridor, continue, and we're going to see more and more interest in using innovative water technologies, because we just don't have the water in Central Texas. And so we're going to have to think smarter about where our water comes from in the future. And if you're wondering why there's blueberry pie on my back slide, when I gave a reuse presentation last year, I was like searching for a purple pipe image, and I left the second P out of pipe. So I was wondering, I'm like, why are all these pie photos coming up in my search? And I was just like, boy, that's a beautiful looking pie. So I just rolled with it. So I don't know if I have time for questions, but I see a nod yes. So happy to take any questions you might have. Andres.
Yeah, quick question, and thank you for being here. You're always so insightful, and looking forward to working with you and Cedar and all the labs that we're in. I understand that the loss of water in the United States from main breaks and pipe breaks is significant. What are your thoughts on, 52,000 water utilities using AMI, leak detection? It seems like that's a big opportunity to go fix that. Are we doing anything like that? Are we promoting that? Are we on a theme of automation of the water system so that we are not wasting so much? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The question is, for the folks watching this remotely, is it brutally summarized, what are we doing about water loss in the system? So yes, there can be pretty substantial water loss in our water distribution systems. Last number I'm familiar with Texas is like the average is about 15%. Rural systems can be upwards of 50% water loss because there's long lines between customers. There was an analysis that came out earlier this year or late last year looking at Texas that represented the number in a way I hadn't seen before, that made it hurt, which was, what is the average system water loss at per home in Texas? And it was 50 gallons. Is that right? 50 gallons per household per day. So before you even turn your faucet on, the system has lost 50 gallons before it gets there. And my wife and I are very conservative on water. I'm more than she is. And we use about 50 gallons a day. And so, half the water that makes it to our house gets lost by the system. AMI, advanced metering infrastructure, and the data that comes with that is a great way of kind of the city tracking the water as it goes through its system, seeing where it comes out in much greater detail. And it helps to have that time granularity of that data to see if there's losses. Austin, for example, is upgrading its system to AMI. I still have an analog meter, but my house is in a UT program where we do have a meter that's tracking that usage like every 30 seconds. But my friends that have the AMI, they're like, they'll get an email that, hey, it looks like you have a water leak. And they're just like, really? And they look around, sure enough, they find that they have a water leak. So the city can monitor. Now, some people are freaked out by that. There was a next door, which is a great place to go for paranoid neighbors. But someone was like, they're putting in, they're going to monitor our water use. And I'm just like, this is a good thing. Ultimately save water. It'll save you money potentially if you're losing a lot of water. So that's a good thing. And then there's opportunities for technology on trying to identify those leaks, designing pipes that don't leak, or solutions to fixing pipes in situ.
The reason I bring it up, and you have the influence to make this happen perhaps, but I think that we're in water behind on this. The power grid, and we did AMI in 2003, and it spearheaded the whole PUC thing, and smart meters were mandated in Texas by 2010. But we don't have such a thing in water.
Yeah,
why not?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. We should. Yeah, there is the legislature, this last session, did respond in part to that water loss report I mentioned, and that helped kind of pass an infrastructure $1 billion infrastructure bill that's up for confirmation by voters later this year. But it hasn't got to the point of you need to put in AMI. That's a good point. It's a good point. I'll mention that to some key friends.